Bill said I need to dress a little bit more colorfully. This whole month, we've had 5 Sundays, and I got to open up the first weekend, and our word this month was understanding, and so I got the first shot, I got the first word, and I also now get the last word. Now, everything I said to you on July 4th about understanding, forget about that. This is the last word. This is the real truth. This is what I really understand. And all those other people in the middle, I'm just kidding. The word understanding is a powerful word. All of the words we've been using this year are power words. But more and differently than the other words, understanding is like, it's kind of like obscenity. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. I know it when I hear it. I know it when should I pose? No, please do. I love it when I get my picture taken. I'm secretly narcissistic and vain. And I like to be on social media and have people wonder what kind of a church this is. So the thing that I want to talk about today is I want to use an idea and a metaphor and the music, okay? So these guys are so great, and they're also so tolerant that they let me sit in with them and don't mind if I lag or get too loud, or they're just great guys. But they're also inspirational to me. So music and musicians are inspirational to me. And so some of you think that we all sit around and powwow about what we do, and that myself or the powers that be that decide the music. But actually, these guys decide the music, and we throw things out, and somehow this soup of music comes together. And very often, what I feel like is going on is that when Mark and Ray are having their conversations, that it inspires me to do other things, to bring up other songs. And so today, I want you to understand something really important, and I'm going to use music as an example or a metaphor or a simile or one of those words that I don't understand. I want you to understand punk music. All right, who's my punk rock fans here? All right, for those of you at home, there's like 50 hands up right now. So when Bill introduced me, there was a Paul Simon song, and how many Simon and Garfunkel fans here? See, look at that, all these hands are up, all right? So American Tune, Simon and Garfunkel, lots of hands up. Elvis Costello, not so much. Oh, there we go. That song, What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding, is one of what we call the seminal songs of the punk music genre. Nobody in punk music says punk music genre, but it's a song that came out at about 1973, and it started to express the feelings that people had at that time. Now, by contrast, the Paul Simon song also came out at about 1973, all right? So American Tune, pastoral, Americana, it's just so much of what Paul Simon brought to us along with Garfunkel in the 60s. This idea of feeling groovy and Americana and one world and peace and love and understanding. By 1973, however, just to give you a kind of an idea, the Nobel Peace Prize, when this song was being written, In 1972, does anybody remember who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1972? Nobody does. You know why? They didn't hand it out. That's where we were in the world. And if that wasn't bad enough, you know who won it in 1973? Henry Kissinger. I don't know if you all remember Henry Kissinger, but I'll go out on a limb and say that Henry would not have been my top choice. Oddly enough, however, so many of the things that he started and did end up becoming something like Jimmy Carter won a few years later, largely built on the work of people like Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski. Does anybody remember Zbigniew Brzezinski? No, yep, somebody does. Okay, Micah Brzezinski, that's her dad, all right? National Security Advisor. There's a weird collection of all these things that come together in 1973. Some of you remember like a little thing called the Vietnam War, all right? That was going on at that time. Context and period and time are so important to our understanding of things. So if you notice that when I wrote this title, the way that it is on the album, does anybody remember albums? Okay, so I had a 45. Does anybody remember what a 45 is? Okay, so on 45 it says, "What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding?" And there's no question mark. In fact, there's no punctuation. In fact, one of the things about punk is that they're going to all start to do this. No punctuation, no parenthetical remarks, no anything. Just boom, in your face. But that's not the way this song started. You see, when Elvis Costello heard this song, he was hearing it with his understanding of what was going on in the world. And he looked at his producer, a man named Nick Lowe, who wrote this song, and he thought, this so perfectly expresses my feelings of this song. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this the way I hear it. And the way he heard it had banging drums and, you know, what were we starting to think of and as the punk movement? Let me tell you about Nick Lowe. Nick Lowe was a producer, but he also was a guy in a band. And he was a guy in a band at a time when guys in bands were no longer popular in England and London because all kinds of things were going on, like, anybody remember Elton John, and David Bowie? And there was this thing going on called stadium rock and glam rock and money rock, and rock and roll had morphed itself into this multi-million-dollar industry with giant heels and big hair and glasses and lots of glitter and lots of glitz and lots of glam. And the rock and roll that the hippies had brought us, that the folk people had brought us, that sang about peace and love and understanding, had become and morphed into something that was indecipherable. And they still sang about love, but it was a totally different kind of love than the hippies had in the 60s. And so when Nick Lowe wrote this song, he was thinking about what had happened in the last 3 years to himself and to the music, and how he was feeling more and more isolated. So he was one of the people that invented this thing that was called pub rock. Anybody remember pub rock? Okay, it wasn't very popular. In London, all of these bands were replaced by stadium bands and by all kinds of big music and by that thing called American music. and they didn't have anywhere to play, and they used to play in pubs. Even though the people in the pubs didn't like that kind of music, they played for free. And so he made his money producing other bands that were more commercial. And so this thing happened. And they were a reaction to what had happened to rock and roll. But not just rock and roll. They were a reaction to what happened to the world in general. And they saw it through the eyes of music. So earlier, Mark and Ray played a song called I'm a Believer. Anybody remember that? Because it was only a few minutes ago. Yeah, before that. You probably remember that before that. Then. Yeah. And so who wrote I'm a Believer? Exactly. Neil Diamond wrote it. And Neil Diamond wrote that song, but he had a totally different idea and feel about it. And so when you listen to that song, we call that bubblegum, by the way. So bubblegum supposedly is the opposite of punk, right? And so when Neil Diamond wrote that song, he had Hammond B3 organ in there, and you hear that, you know. His understanding of it was because he was writing a suite of American songs, and they were all based upon what? On Americana and church music and organ music, and they were the call to the altar. And so anybody here who was raised fundamentalist, Pentecostal, Baptist remembers the Hammond B3 organ and the call to Jesus at the end. Neil Diamond wanted his songs to sound like that, like Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show, like Holly Holy, like I'm a Believer. He had this religious feeling about music. Well, he sold his songs, and like all Tim Panally artists, anybody remember Tim Panally? Okay. Like I was there. And there's this thing, though, where they took their understanding of the song and they gave it to these four lads from Central Casting who were fake Beatles, made for television Beatles, and they put their spin on it, their understanding. And so in their hands, it became what we think of as the Monkees. Now, you might imagine that the Monkees are about as far from punk music, from punk music, as you can possibly get. But if it weren't for the Monkees, there would not be punk music. You're all going, no, actually you're all going, so. Punk music largely started because Nick Lowe was influenced by one guy who came to London and revolutionized his idea of what music is, what it could be, and what it's supposed to be, what his understanding was of his feeling inside. Does anybody know who that person is? Anybody remember Jimi Hendrix? In 1966, Jimi Hendrix was a guy named Jimmy James who played in the Village and was this legendary guitar player, except he was legendary and he was broke. And he'd had a couple of hits in the psychedelic music scene. But hippies don't buy music. Just like my kids, they don't pay for their music either. There's a thing that happened was somebody said, well, I know a guy who should be the opener for you guys. And this guy was talking to these guys, and these guys were the Monkees. And so in 1967, Jimi Hendrix opened for the Monkees. And on their world tour of 29 cities, the first 7 cities, the opener was Jimi Hendrix, and then they fired him because all the kids wanted was Davy Jones to sing. And this guy with big hair, I had hair like that, by the way, in the 70s. I had hair in the 70s. This guy, who was mind-blowingly good, was a huge, huge flop and a failure. And it was just shortly after that that he went to London and he started to play. And nobody knew who he was there, and he couldn't find places to play, so what did he do? He joined the pub rock scene, and Jimi Hendrix played for free in pubs. And that's where a little group called Brinsley Schwarz saw him. And they were blown away. I said that Elvis Costello's song, Peace, Love, and Understanding, was like the seminal song of the punk rock generation. Well, what inspired them was the pub rock generation, and they were inspired by 2 things. Jimi Hendrix. Anybody guess the second one? They were inspired by bootleg copies of the concert at San Quentin of Johnny Cash. And if you ask any punk rocker what the most important song is in punk rock, they'll tell you this song, What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding, or A Boy Named Sue. Why? Because Johnny Cash, who was just getting out of recovery and had just married June Carter, had stripped down his entire band and orchestra, and his best guitarist just died, and he was so distraught, and he decided to play in prisons, and the Man in Black was born with a guitar, a drummer, and himself. The model for skiffle bands, the model for punk rock bands, was based on this idea of stripped-down music that was in your face. And this was the first song where Johnny Cash went to San Quentin prison and sang to the San Quentin prisoners about things that they understood, like getting into a fight with your father because he named you Sue, and then having beers afterwards. So much of the punk aesthetic comes out of that one weird song. So what does this all mean? I'm going to go further away now after I say what does this all mean. Nick Lowe loved Johnny Cash, loved Jimi Hendrix, hated the Monkees. What's so funny about Peace, Love, and Understanding was so much a reaction to what had happened to music, about who sold out, about what happened to Paul Simon, about how the music of peace, love, and understanding and harmony, sweet harmony, had all been replaced. And some people went with it and became processed and glam and bubblegum and sort of a mockery of what the hippie generation and the civil rights movement and all of the promises of the 60s. His reaction was to write this song. And Elvis Costello's reaction was to take it a step further and make it angry and in your face. And the punks took it even further. But they're not the first ones. You see, Johnny Cash learned what he did from the Carter family. And they were the rebels of their time. And they were the punks of their time. These sweet little ladies revolutionized country music. Why? How? They stripped it down to its roots. They stripped it down to its meaning. They remembered the reasons why this music came out in the first place. And they remembered who brought it to us. You see, they all were followers of a man named Alan Lomax. And Alan Lomax went through the South and recorded black musicians. The roots of punk are found in the roots of American music. And American music is race music. What the original Elvis called race music and then gentrified, all of this is the soup, is the mix, that if you don't understand how it's all related, how it all comes together, how each generation's idea of peace and love and understanding colors the music of that, it's hard to appreciate punk. Did you know that punks called themselves punks not because they were different and new? That there's a 150-year tradition of calling yourself a punk. Does anybody know what steampunk is? So steampunk is a literary genre that comes from the 1800s. Jules Verne, original punk. What's his name? Lovecraft, original punk. You see, a punk is a stick that is like an incense stick that doesn't smell, and they use it to light a cannon. We use it to light fireworks. Or, we were so poor, we just waved the punk around. We just didn't have fireworks. The idea of a punk, steampunk, diesel punk, all the different kinds of punks, is that they were the ones that were igniting a revolution. And the punk rock music, the ones that most of us don't really listen to or understand, all of those guys felt that they were starting the revolution. I want us to understand that we are all different in our understandings, but really, we're all the same. And so if I can have an altar call, this is my call, and I can have a little Hammond B3 organ, I'd like to call you all to meditation. I grew up Pentecostal, and this makes me really happy to hear this music. Big Hammond B3 organ, giant Leslie speakers with rotating horns, and this sound that comes from the deep South and churches where you didn't move the organ because it was way too big. So close your eyes. And the roots of punk music, the roots of pub rock, the roots of the psychedelic era, the roots of country and Western, both kinds of music. All of those go back to the beginning of America and an understanding that we had, a belief that we had, one that Paul Simon suggests in American Tune, a belief and an understanding that went out throughout the whole world, that we all deserve peace, that we all deserve love, that we all deserve understanding. But in a revolutionary American fashion, understanding was not something that was told to us or taught to us or given to us. There wasn't one way. There wasn't one truth. There wasn't one thought. And because there wasn't one of anything, of peace, of love, of understanding, we were all free to interpret things with our hearts, with our mind, with the context of who we are and where we were. And so I want you to meditate on the feeling and the idea that as we come out of this particular era that we're in, what are the changes that we are going to see? How are we going to react? And how are our children and our grandchildren's ideas of music, their ideas of politics and of peace and of love and of understanding, materialism, commercialism, all of those things, not just how it's going to shape their music, but how their music is the children of our music, and our music is the children of the music that came before us. And like our music, we ourselves are not just different because of the context of our time and our influences and our poverty or our privilege or our color or our gender, our preferences, but also how we are united by those things. How at the heart of each of our understandings of peace, of love, of even understanding, is that grain, is that seed inside of those things, where we may not know or have the same idea of what those things are, but we feel it in our hearts, in our minds, and our soul, and our genetic DNA, that just like the music that we listen to and its ancestors and its descendants, our ideas of peace, of love, of understanding, and all of the words that we are going to have in our life that bring us and give us power and responsibility to use it to bring about peace and love and understanding. All of those things. Our understanding needs to allow for understanding other people's understanding, and know that it's not the same, but it is. And I thank you for your time and your attention. Peace, love, understanding. Namaste. Thank you so much.